The stage was set for what should have been another light-hearted evening show, a familiar rhythm of laughs, celebrity anecdotes, and late-night banter. Jimmy Kimmel, ever the performer with a polished grin and a sharp tongue, had invited Elon Musk for what viewers expected to be a curious mix of tech talk and casual jokes. The audience buzzed with anticipation, fully aware that any appearance by Musk could take a turn in the most unexpected direction. What they didn't anticipate, however, was the level of hostility that would unfold live in front of millions. It all began with a seemingly innocent question, one wrapped in sarcasm and laced with the kind of passive criticism Kimmel had become known for. He poked fun at Elon's public image as a father, smirking while making a remark about one of Musk's viral moments involving his son. The crowd laughed on cue, but the laughter wasn't shared by the guest. Elon's expression didn't shift into amusement, nor did he offer a dismissive chuckle. He sat back in his chair, his posture stiffening, his gaze narrowing ever so slightly. And just like that, the tension crept in. There was a silence, brief but heavy, a pause that hung in the air and gave birth to a different energy. Elon's response wasn't loud, but it cut deep. It wasn't theatrical, but it carried weight. He didn't try to charm the audience or deflect the insult with humor. Instead, he went straight for the foundation of Jimmy's relevance, subtly undermining the host's credibility and questioning the kind of impact someone like Kimmel had on society compared to the industries Musk had disrupted. What had started as a joke about parenting spiraled into a critique of values, legacy, and purpose. Kimmel, taken aback but refusing to be outmaneuvered on his own show, fired back. He dug into Musk's past controversies, highlighting moments that had drawn public criticism. He raised his voice, his tone sharper now, less humorous, more personal. He tried to corner Elon by painting him as an out-of-touch billionaire, detached from the very people he claimed to inspire. But Musk didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his voice calm but cold, shifting the attention to Kimmel's reliance on scripted humor and safe guests. He reminded the room, without saying it outright, that influence wasn't earned through applause signs and laugh tracks. It came from building something, from risk, from grit. Suddenly, the interview wasn't about late-night entertainment anymore. It had transformed into a battle over legacy, ego, and the right to define truth on public platforms. The audience sensed the change. The laughter had faded. There were murmurs, gasps, the occasional uncomfortable chuckle. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. Something real was happening, something raw, and it was unraveling on national television without filters. Kimmel tried to regain control. He forced a smile and attempted to pivot the conversation back to light-hearted ground, but the shift had already occurred. Elon didn't follow. Instead, he pushed further. He called out the culture of mockery that late-night shows thrived on, implying that their brand of humor had done more harm than good by normalizing shallow cynicism. His words weren't shouted, but they landed like a slap. The live audience didn't know how to respond. The air was charged, and the silence that followed was louder than any applause. From the control booth, the producers began to panic. Camera angles were adjusted. Off-screen handlers exchanged frantic glances. But no one dared cut away. The tension was pure television gold, and the longer it simmered, the more viewers were pulled into it, not for laughs, but for the spectacle of two powerful men exposing their rawest truths in front of a live audience. As the first segment neared its close, Kimmel's face was visibly strained, and Musk had taken full command of the room. What had started as a playful jab had awakened a storm, and that storm was only beginning to build. The cameras faded to commercial, but backstage, no one moved. Not the crew, not the audience, and certainly not the men on stage. As the show returned from commercial break, the audience expected the tension to settle, but the fire between the two men only intensified. What had begun as a casual interview had now transformed into a psychological duel. Kimmel, still seated, under the glare of studio lights, tried to reclaim authority with forced cheerfulness. But beneath the surface, he was rattled. His usual confidence, the charm that had carried him through years of live television, was cracking. And Elon knew it. Musk, in contrast, appeared unmoved. He leaned back with the composure of someone who had walked into storms far more dangerous than a late-night television host with a wounded ego. His voice was steady, his gaze locked, and everything about his demeanor suggested control. He had sensed weakness, and now he was pressing. The momentum had shifted. The stage, once Kimmel's domain, had become Elon's arena. Jimmy attempted another jab, this time laced with mock concern about Musk's behavior online. His blunt tweets, his controversial opinions, his refusal to conform to public relations norms. But the attempt fell flat. Elon countered with a calculated dismantling of Kimmel's platform, pointing out how the show, beneath all the jokes and laughter, had done little to challenge the narratives it pretended to satirize. He described the pattern, the revolving door of celebrities, the safe political stances, the applause lines, all engineered to keep audiences comfortable rather than informed. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was a reckoning. Kimmel's face flushed, and the veneer of professionalism gave way to something harsher. He raised his voice and leaned in, calling attention to Musk's polarizing reputation and suggesting that fame had blurred his grasp on reality. He pointed to how Musk's supporters treated him as more than a businessman, as if he were some kind of prophet. That, Kimmel argued, was dangerous. Delusion dressed up as genius. But Elon didn't retreat. He absorbed the insult with unnerving calm and then retaliated, not by defending himself, but by dissecting Kimmel's career. He called attention to how the show had evolved over the years, not in courage or depth, but in desperation to remain relevant. Musk wasn't interested in being liked, he reminded everyone. He was interested in truth, regardless of who it offended. There was a shift in the crowd. Some faces showed admiration, others discomfort, but everyone was locked in. The energy changed further when Elon mentioned something no one expected: the stagnation of media itself. He didn't just criticize Kimmel's show. He questioned the whole industry, accusing it of trading curiosity for comfort and truth for easy applause. He spoke of how entertainment had become a shield against difficult conversations, and how personalities like Kimmel were no longer hosts, but gatekeepers who decided which voices deserved to be heard and which didn't. Kimmel, his hands now tightly clasped, was visibly seething. He tried to pivot, tried to regain footing by calling for audience levity, even attempted a dig at one of Elon's companies. But Musk didn't take the bait. Instead, he smiled for the first time, a faint, knowing expression that suggested not only had he won this exchange, but that he had seen it coming all along. And then, with eerie calm, he did something that left the entire room stunned. He used Kimmel's own past against him. Elon brought up a clip, an old one, nearly forgotten, where Jimmy had once mocked a struggling worker during a sketch years ago. The crowd fell silent. Elon didn't need to say much more. The implication was clear. Those who stand on a stage built on mockery should not pretend to lecture others about morality. Kimmel froze. The room went cold. The studio was no longer a playground for laughs, but a battleground where reputations hung in the balance. The control booth cut to wide angles, desperately trying to reduce the intimacy of the moment. But it was too late. Everyone watching knew this had gone beyond entertainment. As the segment closed, Jimmy sat there blinking, unsure of how to respond. Elon, on the other hand, remained perfectly composed, his message delivered, his point carved deep into the foundation of the show itself. This wasn't just an argument, it was a dismantling, and the next segment promised to take it even further. As the next segment began, the atmosphere had completely changed. Gone were the polite chuckles and the rehearsed introductions. The audience had shifted from passive spectators to uneasy witnesses, watching a conversation unravel into something far more personal and raw. Jimmy Kimmel sat at his desk with an expression that tried to recover control, but the damage had already seeped through. His charm, once his most reliable weapon, had been stripped down to the bare bones of defensiveness. And Elon Musk, sitting with a quiet intensity, wasn't done yet. The producers had tried to insert a pre-planned segment, a humorous game, a bit of levity to soften the blow, but it was clear neither man had any interest in pretending anymore. Elon refused to engage with it, and the audience, sensing the rising tension, remained dead quiet. The studio lights still glared, the cameras still rolled, but the usual rhythm of the show had collapsed under the weight of something too real to script. Kimmel, unwilling to let the entire night spiral away from him, decided to retaliate with force. He launched into a more direct attack, no longer relying on jokes. He brought up Elon's reputation for erratic leadership, questioned the treatment of workers under his companies, and painted him as a man who had built a fortune on innovation but left people behind along the way. It was a deliberate shift, one designed to hit a nerve, to cut through the intellect and strike at Elon's sense of identity. But Elon, unfazed, leaned into it. He didn't deny the criticisms. Instead, he reframed them. He admitted to being imperfect, driven, even obsessive, but he also spoke about why. He reminded everyone that progress never came wrapped in comfort, and that revolution never came from playing nice. He pointed out the double standard, how late-night hosts could build empires by tearing people down. But the moment someone like him pushed back, he was labeled toxic. It wasn't defensiveness, it was defiance, and the audience felt it. They weren't sure whether to side with the host they'd trusted for years or the man who had just peeled back the curtain on the machinery of celebrity itself. Then came the breaking point. Kimmel, perhaps out of desperation, attacked Elon's family. He questioned his parenting again, but this time he brought up the emotional toll it must take on the children to be raised under constant public scrutiny. He framed it as concern, but the undertone was biting. It was meant to wound. The room stiffened. Elon's smile faded. What came next wasn't anger. It was precision. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lash out. Instead, he delivered a brutal truth, that while Kimmel had the luxury of judging from the safety of a controlled studio, real life demanded more than cheap shots and scripts. He made it clear that being a father under the microscope was difficult, but at least he was building a future those children could be proud of. It wasn't just a counterattack. It was a dismantling of everything Kimmel had been trying to protect. The studio, once a fortress of comfort and applause, now felt like a spotlighted cage. Kimmel, visibly shaken, tried to move on, to escape the direction things were going, but it was already too late. Elon had taken the mask off the show, stripped away its illusion of control, and laid bare the contradictions. And then, in a moment that stunned even the crew, Musk took aim not just at Jimmy, but at the very structure of late-night television. He called it outdated, shallow, and detached from the world it claimed to represent. He spoke of how these shows had become echo chambers for self-satisfaction, where difficult ideas were boiled down to punchlines and real challenges were mocked, until they no longer seemed threatening. It wasn't a rant, it was a funeral speech for the system itself. Kimmel sat speechless, fingers drumming nervously on the desk. He was exposed in a way he hadn't anticipated. The applause signs stayed lit, but the claps were thin and uncertain. Even the audience could sense it. This was no longer Jimmy's show. And Elon? He didn't need to say much more. The silence he left in his wake was louder than any monologue ever written. The fourth segment opened to a silence that felt heavier than before. A silence that didn't just fill the room but seemed to linger in the bones of everyone watching. For years, Jimmy Kimmel had orchestrated the rhythm of this show, guiding, conversations with the practiced ease of a man who knew every beat, every laugh line, every applause cue. But now, none of that mattered. The familiar notes of late-night banter had faded. All that remained was the raw tension between two men, one fighting to preserve his stage, and the other dismantling it brick by brick. Kimmel tried to find his footing again. He glanced at the teleprompter, then ignored it. He looked to the crew for reassurance, but none came. Then, with the weight of humiliation building beneath his skin, he launched a final aggressive salvo. Not for laughs this time, but to reassert dominance. He accused Elon of being delusional, of living in a bubble where his wealth and influence insulated him from consequence. He brought up the media scandals, the employee walkouts, the public backlash. Each reference meant to break the composure. Elon had carried through the night, but Elon didn't blink. Instead, he pivoted with brutal clarity, reminding Kimmel and the audience of something that couldn't be ignored. His companies had redefined transportation, space exploration, and energy production. He reminded everyone that while Kimmel had built a career on interviewing actors and comedians, he had spent his life building machines that could one day change the future of civilization. It wasn't arrogance, it was scale. And in that moment, everyone felt the contrast in their bones. Kimmel grew agitated. The set that once gave him control now felt like a trap. He raised his voice, tried to pull laughter from the audience by ridiculing Elon's fanbase. But the laughs were no longer easy to summon. Something had shifted in the crowd. Curiosity had replaced amusement. The audience wasn't looking for jokes anymore. They were looking for truth. And right now, the truth wasn't on Kimmel's side. Then came the most shocking moment of the night. Elon turned his attention to the broader hypocrisy of the entertainment world, drawing lines between their performative activism and their private indulgences. He spoke with precision, exposing how many of those who claimed to speak for justice had done little more than signal their virtue from the comfort of gated homes. He didn't accuse directly, but his gaze stayed fixed on Kimmel, and the implication was unmistakable. Jimmy flinched. The crew knew the moment was explosive. Several behind the scenes scrambled, whispering into earpieces, debating whether to cut to commercial early. But the cameras kept rolling. The director hesitated, sensing that pulling away now would be seen as surrender. Kimmel, for all his experience, had never faced this kind of collapse. He tried to smile, but it came out crooked. His hands were shaking slightly, barely noticeable, but real. He looked out to the audience and saw not the comfort of loyalty, but the weight of scrutiny. And in that moment, he realized something. Chilling. He was losing them. Elon, calm as ever, sat with his hands folded, waiting. Then, to everyone's surprise, Musk mocked the very premise of the show. Not with humor, but with surgical sarcasm, comparing it to a fading circus act where the audience was slowly waking up to the illusion. He didn't need to raise his voice. His words worked like acid, quiet but corrosive. Kimmel was cornered. He could no longer laugh it off. He tried to rally, but the energy was gone. The studio no longer felt like his. The audience no longer felt his charm. And Elon, without ever shouting, had done what few had managed before. He broke the mask of invincibility Jimmy had worn for decades. The last few minutes of the segment dragged like dead weight. The energy was drained, the laughter dead. The room sat in the aftermath of something they hadn't expected to witness. A host dismantled, a guest unshaken. As the show prepared to close its final segment, Jimmy Kimmel sat quieter than he had the entire night, staring not at Elon, but down at his own notes, as if searching for something. Perhaps dignity, perhaps direction, perhaps the words to recover. But Elon Musk didn't wait. He straightened in his seat, glanced toward the cameras, and prepared to deliver the final blow. The final segment began with a strange stillness. No one spoke for several long seconds. It was the kind of pause that happens just before the sky breaks open. The usual rhythm of the show was beyond repair. The producers had stopped trying to guide the moment. The teleprompters were abandoned, and the stage lights no longer seemed to illuminate a performance, but rather expose something raw and uncomfortable. Jimmy Kimmel sat hollow-eyed, the weight of the night pulling at his face, while Elon Musk leaned forward slightly, as if stepping into a moment he had anticipated from the beginning. Elon's voice sliced through the silence, not loud but unmistakably decisive. There was no attempt to soften the impact now. He addressed not just Kimmel, but the viewers at home, speaking directly into the lens, as if bypassing the host entirely. He spoke about failure, but not his own. He spoke of the failure of cultural gatekeepers, of voices that had grown stagnant while pretending to remain relevant. He dismantled the illusion that satire was the same as insight, that jokes could replace meaningful dialogue, and that applause could substitute for actual courage. And then, with eerie precision, he mocked Kimmel, not with a one-liner or a clever zinger, but with cold, unflinching ridicule. He likened the host's persona to a mannequin dressed in borrowed opinions, shaped more by trending topics than actual conviction. Elon didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He simply spoke the kind of truth that is too sharp to laugh at. The audience froze. The silence was now suffocating. Kimmel attempted to respond, but the words stumbled out of him without form. He was visibly unmoored, grasping at familiar habits, sarcasm, irony, a self-deprecating chuckle. But none of it worked. Not anymore. The show had long since slipped out of his hands. Elon didn't wait for a rebuttal. He stood up, without drama. Without spectacle, he gathered himself with the poise of a man who had just won a war without raising his voice. The cameras tried to track him as he walked across the stage, the silence from the audience now bordering on reverence. No one clapped. No one moved. There was no music playing him out, no handshake or farewell. There was only a chair left empty and a host left speechless beneath the bright and unforgiving lights. As Elon reached the edge of the stage, he turned once, not to Jimmy, but to the audience. He left them with one final piercing observation about the danger of confusing popularity with substance, and then he walked off set. The room remained still for several seconds. Kimmel stayed seated, staring into the distance, his face stripped of showmanship. The audience, sensing the gravity of what they'd just witnessed, didn't dare applaud. There was no script left to follow. And just like that, the show faded to its end. Not with laughter or cheers, but with a humbling silence that echoed long after the cameras stopped rolling. In the hours that followed, clips of the confrontation flooded the internet. Every platform was lit up with commentary, debate, and disbelief. Some sided with Kimmel, clinging to years of loyalty. Others, many others, saw the moment as a reckoning long overdue. Elon Musk didn't need to respond. He had already said everything he needed to say. And Jimmy Kimmel? He returned to his show the next night. But things were different. The laughter came slower. The crowd felt thinner, quieter. Something had been shaken loose, and no matter how much the crew tried to patch it up with bright lights and rehearsed bits, there was no escaping the truth that had been laid bare. That night, Elon Musk didn't just win an argument. He redefined the entire stage, and he did it without ever raising his voice.